Next Level Soul Publishing presents The Chronicles of Atlantis, Book 1, The Fall of the First Age, by Philos the Tibetan and Lucien Ardan. Read by William Sterling. Introduction: A Voice Across Time. In the late 1800s, in the rugged foothills of California's Sierra Nevada, a boy of 17 sat down with pen and paper. His name was Frederick Spencer Oliver. He was not a scholar, not a man of worldly education. He had no university training, no deep library of philosophy or science to draw from. By every measure of his time, he was an ordinary youth. And yet, through him, something extraordinary began to speak. Frederick said the words were not his own. They came unbidden, flowing as though dictated from another realm. He became a vessel, a channel, through which a presence calling itself Philos the Tibetan began to tell a story. The record of lives lived in ages long past, and truths stretching far beyond the reach of his young mind. It would have been impossible for Frederick, with his limited schooling and life experience, to invent the vast scope of what emerged. The book spoke of Atlantis, not as myth, but as memory, describing technologies and philosophies unknown in the 19th century. It spoke of airships and wireless communication long before airplanes or radios existed. It wove intricate teachings of reincarnation, karma, and cosmic law with a fluency no untrained teenager could have conjured. To many, this was proof enough. The words did not come from him, but through him. For channeling is not invention. It is memory refusing to die, wisdom finding a willing instrument, the eternal using the ordinary to make itself known. And so, a dweller on two planets was born, first published in 1886, later expanded in 1905, and carried forward as one of the most enduring works of American metaphysical literature. Some dismissed it as fantasy, others hailed it as prophecy. Yet those who read with an open heart could feel what mattered most, the pulse of truth beneath the words. The heart of the book is not only Atlantis, nor its uncanny predictions of future technologies. Its essence is a teaching that we are souls on a vast journey across lifetimes, bound to the laws of cause and effect. That civilizations, like individuals, rise and fall according to whether they honor or ignore those laws. That what befell Atlantis is not a distant tale, but a living mirror for our choices today. This edition is not a mere reprint. It is a reimagining, a retelling for the modern reader. Oliver's original language, steeped in the heavy prose of his era, can feel impenetrable now. But the voice that spoke through him is larger than any century. And so here it is, given new life in words that breathe with clarity and rhythm for our own time. Think of it as a channeling of a channeling. The same current of truth that poured through a boy in California over a century ago now flows again, reshaped but not diminished. The river is the same, only the banks have shifted. What follows is not history in the narrow sense. It is memory, myth, prophecy, and spiritual teaching woven together. It is Philos, speaking once more, reminding us that the soul is ancient, that life is eternal, and that humanity is forever standing at the threshold of choice. This is part 1 of 3 volumes, tracing the rise and fall of Atlantis and the karmic lessons carried forward. In Book 2, In the Shadow of the Pyramids, the soul's journey continues into ancient Egypt, where reincarnation, karmic consequence, and esoteric initiations unfold beneath the gaze of the pyramids. In Book 3, Atlantis Reborn in America, Philos returns in 19th-century America, facing modern struggles, testing the lessons of Atlantis in a new age, and encountering occult teachers who remind him, and us, that wisdom is always reborn in fresh forms. In this next-level soul edition, you will not only encounter the story itself, but also narrative retellings that bring the ancient scenes vividly to life, written in a voice that resonates with today's reader. Spiritual insights drawn from each chapter, distilling the deeper truths behind the story. Practical applications. Reflections and practices to integrate Atlantean lessons into everyday life. Lesson summaries that bridge myth to modernity, showing how these eternal patterns still shape our choices now. For you, too, are a dweller on two planets, one foot here in the world of matter, the other already rooted in the eternal. This book is a reminder of that truth. The channel is open again. The voice of Philos returns. And now it speaks to you. Chapter 1. The Voice of Memory. There are moments in life when the present seems too thin to contain you. You sit in silence, and suddenly the edges of the world blur, and a whisper rises from somewhere older than your bones. It is not imagination, nor is it the idle play of fancy. It is memory, though not of this life, not of this name, not of this century. That is how it began for me. The voice of memory, faint at first, like the echo of music heard through walls, but as I leaned into it, it grew clearer until I could no longer deny it. The memories came not as stories told, but as experiences lived again. Sunlight glancing off a sea I had not seen in this body, the strange hum of machines that do not exist today, and the vibration of a world whose very air shimmered with power. You may call it Atlantis if you like. The word is heavy with myth, but what I remembered was no fable. It was a place of stone and crystal, of towers that kissed the clouds and vessels that sailed not only seas but skies. A civilization at once brilliant and broken, brilliant in its mastery of nature's hidden laws, broken in its inability to master itself. And I was there. Not as a tourist of time, not as a dreamer dipping into archetype, but as a soul who lived, breathed, loved, and lost in that world. My present life, this modern flesh, was simply the next chapter. And as the veil thinned, the voice of memory told me, "You have been here before. You have walked these paths, and the lessons you failed to learn still wait for you now." What does it mean to remember another life? Imagine you find an old journal in your attic. You begin to read, and halfway through you realize, this is my handwriting. You recognize the slant of the letters, the odd turns of phrase only you would use. And yet, the one who wrote it is not the you of today. They are another version, distant but undeniable. That is how past life memory feels. The shock of familiarity, the deep knowing. This was me. And yet, it was not. I recalled being a student in Atlantis, studying laws not written in any book today. We called them forces of nature, but they were more than that. Vibrations, harmonics, living intelligences woven into the fabric of reality. Where today we play with electricity as if it were the final marvel, in Atlantis we had gone further, tapping into subtler currents of the cosmos. Machines hummed with the resonance of thought itself. Crystals sang like choirs of angels, storing not only energy, but knowledge, memory, history. You might think it all fantasy, but if so, why do such stories echo across cultures separated by oceans and centuries? Why do fragments of Atlantis appear in Plato, in Egypt, in the myths of the Maya? Perhaps because these are not fables at all, but collective memories, souls whispering across time, refusing to let us forget. The voice of memory is not content with storytelling. It presses upon the heart with urgency. Learn. Do not repeat. Remember why you fell, so that you may rise. For Atlantis was no utopia. It was a civilization that mastered the heavens yet failed the earth. A people who could harness the secret fire of creation yet could not master their own desires, and so it crumbled, as all things unbalanced must. And here I was, centuries later, in another life, another body, still haunted by the unfinished lesson. Karma, some call it, cause and effect woven across lifetimes. You might say the soul is like a traveler carrying baggage from one inn to another. You may leave the inn, but the bags are still with you, waiting to be unpacked. The memories were not given as entertainment. They were a summons. I remembered because it was time to reckon with those choices, time to apply the wisdom earned in fire and ruin. What I failed to understand then, I must now attempt again. Now, some will ask, how can one know these are not dreams or imagination dressed in ancient robes? To that, I can only say, dreams fade. They dissolve with the morning. But these memories endured, insistent and sharp. They carried the weight of lived reality. They brought not only images, but feelings, the smell of sea spray, the ache of love lost, the guilt of choices made. No dream is so persistent. And besides, must we demand proof for every mystery before we let it speak to us? Is there not value in listening, even if certainty escapes us? As Alan Watts once said, the menu is not the meal. To cling to proof is to eat the menu while ignoring the feast. Far better to taste and see what nourishment arises. The feast of these memories was not nostalgia, but awakening. They revealed that life is not a single thread, but a tapestry, woven from countless lives, countless bodies, countless lessons. Death does not end the story, it merely turns the page. And when you awaken to that truth, the world itself becomes larger. Each meeting is more than coincidence. Each struggle is more than bad luck. Everything is the soul reminding itself of what it still needs to learn. Perhaps you, too, have felt it. That sudden sense of déjà vu so strong it chills your skin. Or the moment you meet someone for the first time and feel the electric certainty, I have known you before. Or perhaps you've walked into a place you've never visited in this life, and yet you know its corners, its shadows, as if you once lived there. The rational mind dismisses it as trickery, but the soul whispers otherwise. The voice of memory is not reserved for mystics or sages. It hums in all of us, waiting for silence deep enough to hear it. Our culture, busy with its endless noise, rarely grants us that silence. But if you stop, if you breathe, if you listen, you may hear the echo of your own Atlantis. The first chapter of Remembrance is not about convincing you of history, it is about awakening you to possibility. The possibility that your soul is older than your name, that you carry within you an ocean of stories waiting to rise like forgotten songs, and that these stories matter, not because they prove Atlantis, but because they remind you of your own unfinished business, your own eternal journey. So I begin here with memory, not because memory is comfortable, but because it is demanding. It asks, what will you do now that you remember? For memory without action is a ghost. The purpose of recalling Atlantis is not to marvel at lost glories, but to recognize the patterns we repeat today. The same lust for power, the same blindness to balance, the same hubris that topples empires. To remember is to be warned. To be warned is to be offered the chance to change. And so, dear reader, I invite you into this voice of memory, not mine alone, but ours. For what I recall, you too may feel stirring within. Atlantis is not dead. It is a mirror. And in its rise and fall, you may glimpse the shape of your own soul's journey and of humanity's choice today. The voice of memory speaks. The only question is, will we listen? Spiritual insights. Memory is not just a record in the brain. It is the echo of eternity vibrating through the soul. When we experience déjà vu, sudden recognition, or the deep familiarity of a stranger's eyes, we are brushing against this larger continuity. These are not accidents. They are reminders. Atlantis, whether you accept it as literal history or archetype, functions as a cosmic mirror. Its downfall was not divine punishment, but consequence. The Atlanteans had mastered the external world, but not their internal world. Power without balance, wisdom without humility, inevitably collapses. The same is true of us, personally and collectively. To awaken is not only to recall, but to choose differently this time. The memory itself is the invitation. Living the teaching. Pause at déjà vu. Instead of dismissing it, ask, what is my soul trying to remind me of here? Treat connections as continuations. That instant bond with a stranger? Perhaps a soul contract returning. Approach it consciously. Listen in stillness. Create moments of silence each day. In that quiet, the whispers of memory can surface. Reflect on patterns. Where in your life do you see the same mistakes repeating? That may be your personal Atlantis asking for resolution. Closing reflection. The voice of memory is not a ghost story from a drowned continent. It is the soul's reminder that we have lived before, chosen before, and fallen before. To remember is not to dwell in the past, but to see the pattern, and to choose differently now. Atlantis lives not under the ocean, but in us, and its lesson is simple. Power without balance destroys. The memory is given so that we might remember not only where we came from, but who we truly are. The voice of memory speaks again. The question is not whether it is real. The question is, will you let it change you? Chapter 2. The Land of Atl. When the voice of memory grows louder, it does not simply whisper of faces or feelings. It paints landscapes. It lays its hand upon your chest, and the world you thought you knew exhales, and another breath, older and vaster, draws you in. It reveals entire countries fully formed, as if someone had turned the star field of your mind and found a hidden continent. So it was with Atlantis, or as we called it then, Atl. Atlantis was no fairy tale. It rose out of the ocean like a thought made stone, broad-shouldered peninsulas and island chains stepping down into blue, rivers braided silver through valleys and fanned into deltas that fed sea and city alike. Far inland, mountains with crystal-threaded bones held the sky on their shoulders. In the mornings, the peaks wore shawls of mist. By noon, they flashed like knives. The air was warm, perfumed with blossoms this age has no name for, petals like the inside of seashells, fragrances that made the blood remember. And often the skies themselves were alive with movement. Vessels that skimmed not upon water, but upon the unseen currents between earth and heaven, glints of silver sliding from tower to tower like thoughts exchanged between friends. The heart of Atlantis beat in her cities. They were not built so much as tuned. Towers rose like frozen music, crystalline spires catching sunlight and shattering it across marble streets in prismatic rain. But they were not merely stone and artistry. They were instruments. Each structure was laid upon a lattice of forces the ancients knew well, their foundations set where Earth's quiet rivers of power converged. Great quartz columns, cut to syllables only the earth could hear, drank from these currents and sang them back into the air. The city glowed not with flame, but with resonance. At dusk, when the sun softened and the towers began to hum, the very stones seemed to breathe. Kaiful was the greatest of these marvels. Imagine avenues wide enough for processions of light, lined with gardens that spilled color like waterfalls. Pavements of polished stone held the memory of every footfall and stayed cool underfoot, even in the noon blaze. Water threaded the plan, canals, fountains, rills, so that the city spoke in murmurs, never in shouts. The people moved as if answering music, not in carriages dragged by muscle, but in carriages drawn by thought and tuned harmonics, sliding along invisible rails as if suspended in intent. Above, the sky carried its own choreography. Vessels shaped like swift birds or curved leaves drifted from tower to tower, held aloft by crystalline hearts calibrated to the same deep tone that steadied the city's own. Abundance was not a boast. It was the weather. Fields beyond the city unfurled grain tall as a man's chest. Fruit hung heavy enough to bend branches into bows of generosity. In the markets, baskets overflowed with colors that stained the air. Fabrics, woven so fine they seemed poured rather than loomed, caught light and let it wander in their threads. Dyes distilled from plants forgotten by time, from minerals coaxed to reveal their inner fire, made garments that shifted as the wearer moved, sea greens deepening to indigo, fire tones blooming and subsiding like breath. We did not only listen to music, we watched it. Certain plazas were bordered by living screens, crystal panels responding to the great instruments of the halls. When the musicians began, the air blossomed with geometry. A sustained note unfurled in spirals. A drum's heartbeat became expanding circles, crossing and recrossing like rain on still water. Children sat spellbound, watching sound become color, become form, learning, without being told, that beauty and law are the same thing spoken in two tongues. There were other wonders, the ones that would sound like sorcery if I had not stood within them. Healing chambers where the ill reclined within rings of stone, while soft tones coaxed their cells back toward order. Libraries where you did not read so much as remember, placing your hands on a crystal and receiving not words, but the feel of the thing itself, how an herb smelled when cut at dawn, the weight of a certain tool in the palm, the grief in a law rewritten after war. Our relationship with knowledge was intimate. We did not consume it. We were permeated by it. But remember this too, we did not dominate nature. We conversed. Farmers walked their fields before planting, laying their palms on soil as if on an elder's hand, asking what it wished to grow that year. Engineers built towers after listening for weeks to wind's preference. The sea had moods. We honored them. When we forgot, she held us to account. Not all of Atlantis was a city's glittering edge. Inland, monasteries shone with a different light. There were schools where silence was honored, where youths learned to hear the difference between hunger's whisper and wisdom's. There were workshops where sound was shaped into tools more precise than any blade. There were kitchens where bread was broken daily with the poor. There were nights in the hills above Kaifel when the city hummed like a hive, and the stars felt near enough to speak if you simply breathed in time with them. And yet, beneath all that splendor, the hairline crack. You know it when you hear an instrument nearly in tune, the note that's almost right, the smile that doesn't reach the eyes. In Atlantis, humility, the ballast of the soul, began to lighten. We were so gifted with the laws of vibration and crystal fire that we drifted toward a ruinous belief. There was nothing beyond our reach, that the earth's currents were ours to command rather than ours to accompany, that the skyships were proof of our dominion rather than invitations to gratitude. You could not see this imbalance if you stared only at the towers. Their faces remained flawless for a long time. You could hear it if you listened. The hum of the city grew a shade thinner. The laughter in the markets sharpened. The fountains sang a fraction sharp. In the councils, you could smell it, a bitterness cloaked as certainty. The gap between those who tuned the towers and those who swept their steps widened, softly at first, then with edges. Exhibitions of crystal fire shifted from healing to spectacle, from spectacle to demonstration, from demonstration to defense. Words grew fat with justification. Necessary, inevitable, efficient. The adepts, patient and grave, cleared their throats and spoke as plainly as they could. Fewer listened. Still, in those early days, the glory was undeniable. To live there was to wake each morning in a world where the possible felt close enough to touch. Children raced light along the edges of fountains. Lovers stood on bridges longer than you could see and believed the future was endless. Pilots stood hand to heart before crystalline cores and wept silently with gratitude when the vessel rose. The feeling of it, of shared astonishment, was a weather of its own. We thought astonishment would save us. It cannot. Only reverence can. Astonishment opens the door. Reverence keeps you kneeling long enough to learn how to walk through. So yes, Atlantis was the jewel of the earth, a beacon of science and spirit woven together so finely that for a season it seemed we had braided heaven and world into one fabric. Anything felt possible, because, in truth, it was. The universe, like a generous host, sets an inexhaustible table. But possibility is a test disguised as a feast. It asks a simple question, again and again in 1,000 forms. Will you use this to remember who you are, or to forget? That was the question under everything. It threaded through our gardens and our councils, our healing chambers and our festivals, asking without accusation, now that you can, why? Now that you know, how? Now that you have, what will you give? In the beginning, we answered well often enough that the city kept singing. Later, as the crack widened, our answers became rehearsed and then brittle. The law was patient. It waited as long as it could. You might ask me, even now, whether I would return to Atlantis if I could. To walk those streets again at dusk, when the towers took up their luminous tone. To ride once more in a vessel that rose because its pilot had aligned his breath with the earth's. To press my hands on a library's crystal and feel a grandmother's bread-making in my palms. Would I go? I would. But not to triumph. To bow. To touch my forehead to the stones I once walked in pride and ask their forgiveness for thinking I could ever own their song. Because the memory of Atlantis is not given so that we can boast of a lost golden age. It is given so that we can hear the question underneath any age. Will you ascend or will you fall? Not ascend to towers, but to truth. Not fall into oceans, but into the small pits we dig with our daily rationalizations. In the end, the world is simple. It presents you with a crystal and asks you to sing. It presents you with a garden and asks you to share. It presents you with a tower and asks you to kneel before you climb. It presents you with abundance and whispers. Remember where it comes from. If you do, the music continues. If you do not, it grows thin, then sour, then silent. And when the music stops, stone follows. All of this the voice of memory showed me, not as a lecture, but as a place I had lived. And because memory loves us, it did not spare me. It took me by the shoulders and turned me slowly until I saw both faces of Atlantis at once, the brilliance and the bruise. Only then did it let me go and breathe my present breath again. Anything is possible. That was true then, and it is true now. The question, as ever, is not whether we can, but whether, this time, we will choose to become worthy of the possible. Spiritual insights. Atlantis represents more than a lost continent. It is a mirror of human potential. Here was a society that understood vibration, thought, and energy, not as abstractions but as living tools. They recognized that matter itself is only condensed spirit, and that the mind, when disciplined, could shape reality as surely as hands could shape clay. Yet, with mastery comes temptation. The Atlanteans' error was not in their knowledge, but in their pride. They mistook power for wisdom, forgetting that the heart must guide the hand. Without inner balance, even the most miraculous science becomes a blade turned inward. This is the rhythm of civilizations. They rise when knowledge is tempered by reverence, when abundance is met with gratitude. They fall when knowledge becomes arrogance, when abundance feeds greed. Atlantis is not just a story of long ago. It is the eternal caution of what happens when a people forget the soul of their science. Living the teaching. How does this echo into our daily lives? We may not pilot crystal ships or raise towers of living energy, but the same pattern hums in us. Technology without mindfulness. Just as the Atlanteans built marvels without restraint, we too wield vast technologies. Ask, am I using my tools to awaken, or to distract, to connect, or to control? The balance of heart and mind. Knowledge can dazzle, but wisdom listens. When making choices, pause. Does this serve only my ambition, or the harmony of all? Gratitude as safeguard. The Atlanteans forgot gratitude and saw abundance as entitlement. Each day, ground yourself by noticing even the simplest gift: breath, food, companionship. Gratitude steadies power. Listening for imbalance. The cracks appear before the fall. In your own life, notice where beauty masks restlessness, where success hides strain. Healing begins by naming what is fragile. Closing reflection. The land of Atlantis rises again not beneath the waves, but within our imagination. To remember its beauty is to awaken to our own potential. To remember its shadow is to recognize the choice always before us. Every civilization, every soul, every lifetime holds the same tension: brilliance and blindness, splendor and shadow. The lesson of Atlantis is not simply that great things were once possible, but that great things are possible now, if we choose balance over pride, wisdom over arrogance, reverence over control. The towers of Atlantis glisten still in the corridors of memory. Their light calls us not to nostalgia, but to responsibility. For if we, like they, forget the soul at the heart of our science, we too may watch the waters rise. Atlantis is a mirror. And when we gaze into it, we are asked, what kind of world will we build? And what kind of soul will we bring to it? Chapter 3. Initiation into Mystery. In Atlantis, knowledge was not scattered loosely to all. It was not a marketplace where anyone could reach out and pluck the fruits of wisdom at whim. It was a temple with many doors, and each door was veiled. To pass through was not a matter of curiosity, but of readiness. The outer sciences were dazzling enough to intoxicate the unprepared. The crystals that sang with light, the harmonics that shaped matter, the machines that answered to thought as readily as a horse to its rider. These wonders alone could have filled a lifetime of study. But behind them lay something greater and more dangerous, teachings that did not merely manipulate the world, but wove directly with the fabric of being itself. It was into these mysteries that I was drawn, not as a casual student or a tourist of marvels, but as one who felt the magnetic pull of remembrance. The moment I first placed my hand on a resonating crystal and felt not just vibration, but recognition ripple through me, I knew I had been here before. My soul leaned forward like a man glimpsing a familiar face in a crowd. The teachers of Atlantis, guardians of the inner law, were cautious. They did not look for cleverness. They did not measure by how many facts a student could recite, or how quickly one could command the machines of light. They looked for balance, for humility, for the ability to be silent in the face of mystery. For what use is it to hand a child a blade of fire if he has not first learned reverence for flame? The first thresholds. My first steps into initiation were not what I expected. There were no grand ceremonies, no blazing revelations, no crowns of light descending from the heavens. The thresholds were small, almost invisible, and they tested not my intellect, but my patience. I was asked to spend days in silence, not speaking even to myself in thought, until my mind's constant chatter turned from a master into a mirror. At first the silence was unbearable. Thoughts swarmed like bees in a disturbed hive, but slowly the hum quieted. The silence grew full instead of empty, and in its fullness I began to hear the subtler notes beneath existence, the whisper of my own soul, the breathing of the earth. Nights were spent gazing at the stars, not as ornaments of the sky, but as living presences. We were told, "Do not look at the stars. Let them look at you," and so we did. I remember one night when Orion hung sharp above the horizon, and I felt, not imagined, not wished, but felt, that his belt of three was a doorway, and something vast beyond it was gazing back, not as alien, but as kin. Stars were not distant. They were teachers clothed in fire. And there were the crystals. Ah, the crystals. Not the decorative shards of later ages, but living instruments, grown and tuned with care. We would sit before them in meditation, their resonance aligned to the frequency of the human soul. Each vibration peeled away a veil of illusion. One day a certain tone struck me so deeply that I saw, not with eyes but with knowing, the pattern of my own being. A lattice of light, interwoven with memory, pulsing in rhythm with the universe. I realized that the cosmos was not out there. It was reflected in me. The hidden chamber. There was a chamber within one of the crystalline towers where initiates gathered. Few in Kaiful even knew it existed. Its walls glowed with a gentle luminescence, light not cast by flame, but radiated by the crystals themselves, tuned to a frequency that opened the inner ear. The adepts spoke sparingly. Often they said nothing at all. We would sit in silence, sometimes for hours, until the very air seemed to vibrate with an unsaid teaching. Their philosophy was clear. Knowledge was not something to be filled in the mind, but something to be uncovered in the soul. The mystery was not about answers. It was about stripping you bare until only truth remained. I remember one adept who finally broke a silence with a single sentence. Power grows only when you stop seeking it. Another said, truth cannot be owned, only lived. Another, the smallest act of kindness weighs more in eternity than the greatest machine. But the hardest lesson of all was this. Memory is not for indulgence. It is for responsibility. To remember is to be accountable. These words pierced me. For what good was it to recall Atlantis if I treated it as a curiosity? To remember Atlantis was to carry its karma, to shoulder its failures, to become responsible for its wisdom. Memory is not entertainment. It is a summons. The subtle dissonance. As my initiation deepened, I began to hear the hum of Atlantis differently. The streets still shone, the towers still gleamed, the people still laughed in their abundance. But beneath it all was a faint dissonance, like a harp ever so slightly out of tune. Once you heard it, you could not unhear it. It was in the way the wealthy began to wall themselves off, in the way healings that had once been given freely now carried a price, in the way laughter in the markets had become a little sharper. It was in the way soldiers began to train not only in defense but in dominance, carrying weapons resonant enough to shatter bone. The adepts warned us, this beauty will not last if its people do not return to balance. The towers hum because the earth still hums beneath them. When the earth shifts her note, the towers will fall. What you learn here is not for glory, but for service. Guard it well. We nodded. We bowed. We promised. Yet even among us, some carried the secret hope that wisdom might make them powerful, that initiation might grant them superiority. Such are the cracks through which the flood begins to seep. Looking back, I see that initiation was less about learning mysteries and more about being shaped by them. The real mystery was not in the crystals or the stars, but in the human heart. Could it be still? Could it be humble? Could it resist the intoxication of brilliance long enough to stay aligned with truth? Some of us managed, for a time. Many of us did not. I count myself among both. Spiritual insights. Initiation is not about joining an exclusive circle. It is about entering a deeper relationship with truth. The Atlanteans knew that real power cannot be handed casually, for without discipline of the heart, it becomes corruption. The mystery schools of Atlantis echo into the mystery traditions of Egypt, Greece, and beyond. Always the message is the same. The real initiation is inward. To master the laws of vibration and thought, one must first master the vibrations of one's own mind and heart. There is also a warning. Civilizations fall not because their knowledge runs out, but because their wisdom does. When spectacle outruns spirit, collapse follows. The adepts of Atlantis tried to remind their people, but not all were listening. Living the teaching. Silence as initiation. In a world drowning in noise, your first mystery school is silence. Each day, set aside a few minutes to sit without distraction. Listen, not to the world, but to the hum of your own being. Reverence before power. Whether it's money, influence, or technology, pause before using it. Ask, am I guided by service or by ego? The mirror of memory. When old patterns surface, the same conflicts, the same choices repeating, see them not as curses, but as initiations. What is life asking you to learn this time? Acts of the small. Remember that in every tradition, the greatest adepts were judged not by their mastery of secrets, but by the gentleness of their daily living. Closing reflection. Initiation is not about being chosen by others. It is about choosing yourself, choosing to live awake. The adepts of Atlantis sought not disciples of brilliance, but disciples of balance. For a single soul aligned with truth is of more value than 1,000 clever minds running blind. The mysteries have never been about hoarding knowledge. They are about shaping souls. What Atlantis whispers still is that we are always being initiated, not into temples of stone, but into the temple of life itself. Every challenge, every temptation, every moment of silence is an initiation. The question is not whether you will be invited, but whether you will recognize the doorway when it appears. Chapter 4. The Fire of the Crystal. If there was one gift that defined Atlantis above all others, it was the crystal. Not the small ornaments we scatter on altars today, not the polished gemstones we wear for decoration, but great living stones, vast, luminous, pulsing with the rhythm of the earth itself. They were not dead minerals, but conscious vessels of power. To us, they were more than matter. They were fire harnessed in form, repositories of memory, instruments of healing and devastation alike. The heart of Atlantis pulsed with crystal fire. Within the towers of Keful, the great metropolis of our age, entire chambers were built to hold colossal stones, taller than 3 men, and wide enough to fill a hall. They were cut and tuned not for beauty alone, but for resonance. Each crystal was a living instrument, aligned with the deep harmonics of the planet, singing in frequencies that carried life itself. When struck by thought, by sound, or by subtle harmonics, the crystals awakened. They sang with voices that made the very air tremble. These songs were not metaphor. The resonance was real. Vibrations that could be felt in the marrow, in the heart, in the soul. Their power carried energy across vast distances, powering ships that crossed both sea and sky, lighting our streets without flame, and even healing the sick when directed by one who knew their language. I remember standing before one such crystal, its core glowing as though a star had been captured inside it. The adepts taught us to listen, not with the ears, but with the body, with the spirit. When the crystal sang, it was not mere sound. It was alignment. The cells of the body answered as though remembering their original rhythm. The heart steadied. The mind cleared. The soul expanded. One could emerge from a single session before the crystal feeling reborn, as if dust had been blown off a mirror, and the reflection shone true again. But not all used them for healing. In the temples, the crystals were more than sources of energy. They were libraries. They stored the very memory of our people, our history, our discoveries, our voices. Imagine placing your hands upon the smooth surface of a stone and being flooded with images, not mere words, but living impressions, sights and sounds and feelings from ages past. This was not knowledge in books, but experience preserved in light. To touch such a crystal was to walk into memory itself, a library made not of scrolls, but of stars. And then, there were the ships. The vessels of Atlantis did not move by sail or oar. They were held aloft and propelled by crystalline cores, tuned to resonate with the subtle fire that flows through the fabric of creation itself. These ships soared across oceans in hours. Some rose higher still, into the upper reaches of the atmosphere, gliding like silver birds across the heavens. What we now call impossible was, to the Atlantean mind, simply the natural unfolding of universal law. Yet within this brilliance lay danger, for the same fire that healed could also destroy. When amplified, when bent toward purposes of conquest or war, the crystals became weapons of devastation. It was said that with a single tuning, one could shatter an entire fleet. Others whispered of devices that could bend the climate of a region, scorching fields or summoning storms. And there were rumors darker still, that certain crystals, when forced beyond their natural resonance, could split the earth itself, calling earthquakes from the deep. In time, some among us did not hesitate to wield such powers. I recall the words of one adept, his voice heavy with foreboding. The fire of the crystal is not a servant. It is a mirror. If you approach with harmony, it will heal. If you approach with hunger, it will consume. The stone itself does not choose. You do. These words became etched in my soul. The crystal is neutral. It magnifies what is brought to it. To one who seeks balance, it becomes an instrument of harmony. To one who seeks power, it becomes a weapon. The danger was never in the stone. It was always in us, and so we were handed the fire of the gods. But what we did with it, that was the true test of Atlantis. Some used the gift to heal, to create, to remember. Others used it to dominate, to destroy, to forget. The crystal reflected both equally, with perfect impartiality. This was our glory. This was our downfall. The crystals of Atlantis remain, in memory, the clearest image of humanity's eternal challenge. Every gift is neutral until the hand of the soul directs it. The question is never whether the universe offers power. It always does. The question is whether we are prepared to wield it with reverence. The fire of the crystal was dazzling. It carried the pulse of creation itself. Yet in that very brilliance lay the temptation to forget humility. We began to believe that because we could command the fire, we owned it. But the adepts reminded us, the stone does not choose. You do. And so, Atlantis became the proving ground for the soul's maturity. Would we choose balance or domination? Would we use fire as light or as weapon? We know now, by history's silence, which path we chose too often. Spiritual insights. The crystal is a symbol of all power, all technology, all knowledge. It is neutral, waiting only for the intent of its wielder. The Atlanteans remind us that the question is never what we possess, but why we possess it. Today, our crystals are the technologies that shape our lives: electricity, nuclear power, artificial intelligence, the global web of communication. Each has within it the potential to heal or to harm. Like the Atlanteans, we stand on the edge of a blade, asked not whether we can, but whether we should. The adept's wisdom still applies. Power magnifies intent. If our hearts are clouded by greed, then our tools become instruments of destruction. If our hearts are clear, they become channels of harmony. The fire of the crystal, then, is not only an Atlantean memory, but the eternal truth that creation mirrors the Creator. Living the teaching. See your crystals. What are the tools or powers in your life? Money, influence, relationships, technology? Each is a crystal waiting for intention. Check the mirror. Before using your tools, ask, what is the energy I bring into this? Fear or love? Greed or service? Align before action. Just as Atlanteans attuned crystals before use, you can align yourself. A few deep breaths, a moment of silence, or a prayer can shift the vibration of any action. Use for healing. Whatever your crystal is, find ways to use it for restoration. Speak words that mend rather than wound. Use technology to connect, not divide. Invest resources in creation, not destruction. Use for healing. Whatever your crystal is, find ways to use it for restoration. Speak words that mend rather than wound. Use technology to connect, not divide. Invest resources in creation, not destruction. Closing reflection. The fire of the crystal is alive in us still. Every choice, every tool, every fragment of power we hold is a crystal waiting to sing. The lesson of Atlantis is that the universe does not punish us for our choices. It reflects them. If we approach creation with harmony, it becomes harmony. If we approach with hunger, it becomes hunger. Atlantis fell not because of crystals, but because of the hearts that wielded them. And so the real question for us is not whether we, too, will master miraculous powers, but whether we will master ourselves. For the crystal is not only in the earth, it is in the soul, and when struck with love, it sings with light. Chapter 5. A Civilization of Splendor and Shadow. Atlantis was a land that dazzled even its own people. Imagine waking each day not into monotony, but into astonishment, surrounded by wonders that to modern eyes would seem like sorcery, and to Atlantean hearts felt natural. Streets themselves hummed with a quiet, perpetual power. Airships floated effortlessly in the skies, their crystalline cores glowing like small suns. Entire districts glowed with light without flame. Illumination tuned to harmonics so gentle they felt more like moonlight than fire. Gardens overflowed with fruits of impossible fragrance and form. Imagine orchards where trees bent under the weight of fruit the size of a child, each piece shimmering with colors that hinted at flavors beyond today's imagination. Fountains were not simply fountains. They sang. Their waters were tuned to the very vibration of the earth, so that to walk near them was to feel your body quietly retuned, heart settling, breath deepening, spirit remembering its rhythm. The people adorned themselves in fabrics that shimmered like water, woven so finely they seemed more dream than cloth. The dyes were drawn from minerals coaxed to reveal inner fires, from plants now lost to history. Colors had dimension, breathing with the one who wore them. Deep blues that pulsed like tides, golds that flared, then softened with movement, crimsons that glowed like embers before dimming to rose. The arts were alive. not confined to stone or canvas, but expanded into realms where sound and light blended. Music was painted, its harmonics dancing across crystal screens in mandalas of color. Sculpture was sung, tones shaped into form, resonances hardened into visible geometry. Architecture itself breathed rhythm, each tower or bridge tuned to harmonize with its surroundings, so that the city itself was like a great instrument always singing. At first glance, it was paradise. Abundance everywhere. Beauty unbroken. A civilization that did not see itself as master of nature, but as her partner. To walk the markets of Kaiful was to experience the earth gathered in a single place. Traders came from the furthest shores of Atlantis, each carrying goods, stories, and songs, spices that burned with desert heat, fabrics that caught the sea's shifting shimmer, voices that echoed with accents from mountain valleys and island enclaves, all converged beneath towers that shone like frozen music. It was a tapestry of cultures woven together, stitched by the conviction that Atlantis was eternal. But memory is not blind. I cannot speak of Atlantis without speaking of its shadow. For just as the towers gleamed, so too did ambition. The people were brilliant, but brilliance is a dangerous intoxicant. Wealth was vast, and with it came hunger for more. Power was subtle, and with it came the desire not only to shape the world, but to wield it over others. The adepts of Atlantis, those who listened to the heartbeat of the cosmos, who felt the living currents of the One flowing through all, warned us gently but firmly, balance must remain, or beauty will fracture. Some listened, many did not, for there were others, equally brilliant, who did not care for balance. They saw knowledge as ladder, each rung leading upward to dominion. To them, the crystals were not healing instruments, but weapons, not allies, but slaves. Every new discovery was twisted into an advantage, a way to secure more control, more wealth, more applause. It is easy to lose sight of shadow in the midst of splendor. The fountains still sang, the ships still soared, the crystals still glowed. Who wanted to believe that beneath the surface cracks were forming? Who wanted to hear that the very abundance we gloried in might be the seed of our ruin? But the signs were there. The gap between rich and poor widened. Towers rose ever higher, but not for all. Palaces of crystal and marble gleamed for the elite, while workers who maintained the infrastructure bent beneath burdens unseen. Markets sparkled with goods, but not every hand could reach for them. Those who spoke for the forgotten were dismissed as pessimists, or worse, as enemies of progress. The priests of the law, guardians of the ancient teachings of unity, warned us again and again, the more you forget balance, the more imbalance will remind you. But their voices grew faint beneath the applause of spectacle. The people preferred festivals of light, new marvels of crystal fire, great shows of power in the harbor where ships rose vertically into the sky. Who wanted to listen to warnings when the future seemed limitless? And so Atlantis stood in paradox. On the surface, it was a civilization of unimaginable brilliance, towers like frozen sunlight, gardens overflowing, knowledge flowering in every direction. But beneath, like a tree hollowing at its core while its branches still gleamed green, the spirit of the people was beginning to rot. The beauty was real. The shadow was real. Both lived side by side, waiting to see which would prevail. Looking back, what strikes me most is not the brilliance itself, astonishing though it was, but how quickly we grew accustomed to it. The dazzling became ordinary. The miraculous became expected. Ships that soared, fountains that sang, fabrics that shimmered, all lost their wonder once they became daily. And when the miraculous becomes mundane, the heart begins to hunger for excess. That hunger is the root of shadow. The lesson of Atlantis is simple. Abundance without reverence becomes greed. Knowledge without humility becomes domination. Beauty without balance becomes distraction. The towers did not fall because they were not strong. They fell because we forgot why we built them. Spiritual insights. Every civilization is a mirror of the soul. It carries within it both light and shadow, both brilliance and blindness. Atlantis is not only a lost continent, it is the eternal human pattern. We create wonders, then forget the heart that must guide them. Splendor without balance becomes distraction. Shadow without awareness becomes destruction. The Atlanteans remind us that the question is not whether beauty and power are possible, but whether we will use them wisely. Look around today. Technology that connects the planet can also divide it. Wealth that could eliminate hunger instead deepens inequality. Entertainment that could uplift is often used to numb. These are the same choices Atlantis faced. Not new dilemmas, but old patterns repeating. The adepts knew civilizations fall not when they lose their brilliance, but when their brilliance blinds them to their shadow. Living the teaching. See the shadow in the splendor. In your own life, where do you enjoy abundance or success? Ask yourself, is there a hidden cost? Who else is impacted by my gain? Balance celebration with responsibility. Beauty is not meant to be rejected, but to be honored. When you enjoy abundance, offer gratitude and share it where you can. Watch for imbalance. In relationships, work, or even in your own inner life, notice when the scales tip too far, when ambition overshadows compassion, when progress eclipses peace. Be a voice of awareness. Just as the adepts spoke warnings, we too can gently remind others, and ourselves, that brilliance must be tempered with humility. Closing reflection. Atlantis was both magnificent and fragile. Its towers shone because its people were brilliant, but the same brilliance, untethered from wisdom, became its undoing. This is the paradox of all human creation. We are capable of miracles, but only if our hearts remain steady. To remember Atlantis is not to grieve for what was lost, but to see the mirror it holds before us. We too live in a time of splendor and shadow. Our towers are digital. Our crystals are circuits. Our ships sail the skies in fire and metal. And the same question is asked of us. Will we use these gifts for harmony, or will we let them hollow us from within? Atlantis whispers still. Its beauty calls us to dream, and its shadow calls us to wake. Chapter 6. Companions of Destiny. In the halls of Atlantis, amid towers of crystal and streets paved with marble that shimmered in sunlight like frozen rivers, I came to realize something that altered my understanding of life forever. Destiny is never walked alone. Memory does not bind only the soul to its past. It binds souls to one another, threading us together across centuries and bodies, weaving stories that stretch far beyond a single life. In that shining city of wonders, I began to glimpse the pattern. There were faces I recognized instantly, though I had never met them in that life before. The recognition did not come through logic or recollection, but through resonance, like hearing the opening chord of a song and knowing every note that follows. A friend whose laughter felt like home, a teacher whose gaze pierced me with both authority and compassion, a woman whose eyes stirred a fire of longing, but also the cold unease of unfinished business. These were not strangers. They were companions of destiny. We called such bonds karmic cords. Some glowed with harmony, ties of friendship, of shared purpose, of love that lifted like wings. Others were heavier, braided of betrayal, jealousy, or debts unpaid. But all of them carried the same purpose, to return us to balance. The universe wastes nothing. Every connection, whether sweet or bitter, is a mirror held up to the soul. I remember the moment one companion first laughed, a sound bright and contagious, the kind of laugh that disarms fear. I had never heard it before in that life, but it struck me with the shock of memory. This was not our first meeting. We had stood together before, walked paths side by side, and though the scene had changed, the thread remained. We trained together under the adepts, learning the secret harmonics of the crystals. We studied not only the science of vibration, but the discipline of silence, the shaping of intent, the delicate balance of will and humility. His loyalty was unwavering, his counsel a steady anchor. Even then, I felt that his soul would walk beside mine again, in other bodies, in other centuries. The thread was clear. And then there was her, the one whose presence unsettled me more than any other. She was radiant, a brilliance that drew my heart like a moth to flame. Yet beneath the light was a danger I could not name, though I felt it in the marrow. Our bond was not new. It was ancient. It carried the weight of choices once made, choices not yet healed. Love, when entangled with karma, is no gentle thing. It is fire. Fire that warms, yes, but also fire that refines, fire that consumes until only truth remains. Every soul I encountered in those halls reminded me of this. We are not wandering alone through chaos. We are woven into one another's stories, bound not by chains, but by threads of cause and effect, love and lesson, wound and repair. These companions of destiny were not chosen by me in this lifetime, but chosen long before, chosen by the weaving of the universe, by the consequences of actions sown in other ages. In them, I saw not only who they were now, but who I had been with them, and who we might yet become. The bonds were not always easy. Some filled me with joy, others with unease, but each one was purposeful. Each one reminded me that the soul does not journey in isolation. We are mirrors for each other, revealing what we cannot see alone. Spiritual insights. No one enters our lives by accident. Every soul we meet is a continuation of a story already in motion. Some arrive as blessings, others as trials, but all come as teachers. The Atlanteans understood that karmic bonds are not punishments, but opportunities. A friend from one life may become a rival in another, not out of cruelty, but because the soul seeks growth through contrast. A betrayer may reappear as family, offering the chance to transform bitterness into forgiveness. To recognize companions of destiny is to awaken to the deeper patterns of relationship. We are not simply strangers colliding in random chance. We are souls weaving a tapestry across lifetimes, each encounter a thread that shapes the whole. Living the teaching. Notice instant recognition. When you meet someone and feel as though you've known them forever, pause. Ask yourself, what story might we be continuing? What lesson waits here? See the teacher in conflict. The people who challenge you most are often your greatest companions of destiny. Instead of resisting, ask, what part of me is this reflecting? What healing is possible here? Honor the bonds of love. Cherish the souls who bring harmony. These relationships are not mere comforts, but the fruit of past choices and the seeds of future ones. Practice forgiveness. To forgive is to cut the heavy cords of karma, releasing yourself and the other from endless repetition. This is the highest gift you can give to a companion of destiny. Closing reflection. In Atlantis, I learned that destiny is not a solitary path. We travel together, again and again, through the corridors of time. The faces may change, the names may shift, but the essence remains. Every friend, every rival, every lover is a mirror, reflecting what the soul has yet to complete. To recognize this is to see life not as chaos, but as choreography. Each step, each meeting, each bond is part of a larger dance, the dance of awakening. And so, when you look into the eyes of another and feel that spark of recognition, do not dismiss it. Lean into it. For in that moment, the universe is reminding you, this is your companion of destiny. Honor the bond, and through it, honor yourself. Chapter 7. A Meeting with the Adepts. There came a night when the summons arrived, as quiet and inexorable as the rising moon. Beyond the marble halls of Kaiful, beyond the glittering markets alive with laughter and song, beyond the hum of crystals that made the city pulse like a great heart, I was called into the mountains. The adepts had spoken little of it beforehand. Their only instruction, given once and never repeated, was this: when you are ready, you will be called. And so, when the messenger came and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, I obeyed without question. We set out beneath the stars. The city fell away behind us, its lights dimming, its voices fading. Our path was lit not by torches, but by the faint glow of crystalline stones embedded in the trail itself. Each step awakened their light, so that the ground shimmered softly beneath our feet, as if we were walking across the very spine of the earth. The air grew colder, thinner, sharper. It carried the scent of stone and pine, mingled with something harder to name. An awareness, a presence, as though the night itself was watching us. My breath grew visible in the dark. Each inhale felt like a cleansing, each exhale like a surrender. At last, we came to the mouth of a cavern. It was not carved by hand, but by intention. Its walls were rough yet symmetrical, glistening with veins of crystal that pulsed faintly, like the breath of the earth itself. As we entered, the resonance deepened. The silence was not emptiness, but fullness, humming with the weight of unseen presences. It was here, in that chamber of living stone, that I first beheld the adepts. They did not arrive with fanfare. They were simply there, as if the cavern itself had given them shape. Their robes were plain, their bearing humble, yet their presence filled the space more powerfully than any king's procession. They were beings who had mastered themselves, and the mastery radiated like heat from a flame. Their stillness was immense. It pressed upon us until the restless chatter of the mind fell silent. It seemed the entire cavern bowed to it. Or perhaps it was simply that, in their presence, one remembered how to bow inwardly, how to fall into reverence without effort. Their eyes struck me most. They did not look at me. They looked through me, past skin and story, past memory itself, into the very thread of my soul. To be seen by them was to realize how small my secrets truly were. One of them spoke, though the words were less sound than thought clothed in form. You are not here to gain power. You are here to remember truth. Power is already yours, for the universe itself flows through you. But without balance, power is destruction. Will you learn balance? The initiation that followed was not of spectacle but of silence. No flames burst, no visions flared, no grand declarations shook the cavern. We sat in stillness as they revealed the deeper laws, not by speech alone, but by resonance, by transmission. They spoke of karma, the rhythm that moves through all things, of how every action, every thought, every vibration reverberates not only through our lives, but through the very fabric of creation. To live in harmony, they said, is to weave beauty into the cosmos. To live in discord is to tear at its threads. They spoke of the unity of spirit and matter, of how all souls are sparks of the same eternal flame, wearing different garments for a season, returning always to the fire. They reminded us that separation is illusion, that domination of one by another is folly, for in truth there is only one wearing many masks. And then they spoke of Atlantis. Their voices grew solemn, not harsh, but heavy with compassion. Your civilization, for all its brilliance, is losing balance. The people are entranced by power, forgetting humility. The crystals sing, but the hearts of men grow deaf. The towers will fall, one adept whispered, unless those who remember the law hold the balance. The words rang through me like a bell. I wanted to deny them. I wanted to believe that the beauty of Atlantis was eternal. But even then, I had heard the faint dissonance beneath the city's music, the thin crack in its harmony. Hearing it named by the adepts made it undeniable. In their presence, I felt both small and vast, a child before eternity, humbled and unknowing, and yet also eternity itself, awakened for a moment within a fragile human form. The adepts were not gods. They were not to be worshipped. They were reminders, living embodiments of what a soul could become when aligned with truth. That night, as I left the cavern, the city of Kaiful no longer looked the same. The towers still gleamed. The markets still sang. The fountains still laughed with water. But now I could hear the undertone, the question beneath the music. Once you meet the adepts, the world is never the same again. Spiritual insights. The adepts teach us that true initiation is not spectacle, but silence. Wisdom does not enter through drama, but through stillness. They remind us that power is not the goal. It is already present, for the universe flows through each of us. The real question is whether we will hold it in balance. Their warning to Atlantis echoes for us today. Civilizations collapse not from lack of brilliance, but from lack of humility. The adepts are still with us, not in caverns of crystal, but in the quiet voice of conscience, in the teachers who live what they teach, in the silence that waits patiently for us to enter. Living the teaching. Seek silence, not spectacle. Wisdom whispers where the world shouts. Practice stillness long enough to hear it. Find your adepts. They may not wear robes or live in mountains. They may be mentors, friends, or strangers whose presence awakens you to yourself. Balance before brilliance. Before chasing achievement, pause. Ask, am I steady in humility? Am I guided by harmony or by hunger? Embody presence. Be an adept in the small. A kind word, a steady breath, a choice of compassion. Presence teaches louder than words. Closing reflection. The adepts were not figures of myth. They were living reminders that the soul is vast, that balance is real, that power must serve truth or destroy itself. Their eyes saw through me, but in that gaze I saw myself more clearly than ever before. Their words still echo. Power is already yours, but without balance, power is destruction. Will you learn balance? That is the eternal question, for me, for you, for every soul, for every civilization. The towers of Atlantis fell because too many answered it poorly. But the question remains, waiting for each of us to respond anew. Once you meet the adepts, whether in memory, in dream, or in the quiet depths of your own heart, the world is never the same again.
To continue listening, step deeper into the wisdom at Next Level Soul TV, where sacred teachings, spiritual cinema, transformative courses, and divine stories await your soul's unfolding. Enter the portal at www.nextlevelsoul.tv and let your spirit remember what it already knows. Awaken, expand, and evolve.